cosplay, and today I bring a video, this time in English because I want more people to understand it. So what I'm going to talk about is about how I made my dagger for the Lady Maria cosplay from the video game Bloodborne. I don't know if you have heard of it before. It's a pretty popular video game, and I personally love the aesthetics and the kind of game, the visual narrative style. I find it really interesting. So as soon as I saw Lady Maria, I really fell in love with the character, with the aesthetics, and I thought it matched me pretty okay. So I decided to make the cosplay. As you can see in my bag, I have already started with some other parts. I already made the coat, some gems, some other jewelry, and I already found some boots also for the cosplay. I already done the hat too, but I decided to start recording later, so what I started by was the dagger. And as you can see, here is the final item finished. It is not made out of foam because I want it to be like really thin, just to look like a metallic item, and I knew I wasn't able to achieve it with foam, so I employed some different materials from the usual. This is not a con-friendly prop, I know, but here in Spain we have not such strict rules to enter cons, so I hope that I can introduce this in some event, but if I can, there's no trouble. I really enjoy doing it. So if you're curious about how I made it, about the materials, about the techniques, or about any other thing, just stay with me and let's go to watch the video. In the first place, I started by drafting a pattern based on some picture I found on the internet. Okay, this is my plan. I'm gonna cut the blade right from transparent plastic, and I'm gonna use the traditional shape of a sword, a real sword, and I'm just gonna make the rest of the handle out of a PVC pipe. I'm gonna cut another, the decorative on the guard, the decorative pieces on the guard. I'm just gonna make like this square hole right here. It's gonna go over there, and then I'm gonna stack, like, you know, all the pieces, and afterwards I'm just gonna heat up this part with my heat gun and introduce them all, like, you know, inside the PVC pipe. Boop. With all the pieces here. That's my plan. After I figured out how I wanted to build my dagger, I started by tracing the pattern of the blade into the Metacrylathe and cutting it. Once I cut the blade, I placed it onto the pattern and traced the filigrines on the Metacrylathe with a permanent marker. Okay, so I made two trials for the metal carving effect, and you can see here the difference. This one is made with, sorry about my broken nail. This one is made just with the dremel, with the rotary tool, and it looks like more matte. And the problem is that as soon as I start carving, the plastic just melts and start covering the surroundings, so I can't really see very well what I'm doing. But when I try with the burning tool, it's just like maybe too shiny and perfect. I don't know, I think it doesn't look so much like metal carving. So even if it's a bit more difficult, I think I'm going to go for this one. Let's try it in the dagger. Okay, so the first thing I'm doing is with this small spheric tool, but it's like a sanding tool. I'm going to make the borders of the drawings, like over here. I'm gonna just border all of them. And after them I will go with a bigger tool, that is this one, which I will use for the bigger areas where I don't need so much precision. So that's it, let's go for it. This is how the blade should look after you have done a pretty big area. Afterwards, I sanded the edge to give it the proper shape. Finally, I polished the edge with a sponge-like head and some polishing paste. And I had to use low speed here because otherwise the plastic would get marked, so it's important that I put the speed at the minimum. After I thought I have finished decorating the dagger, I realized that the filigrees didn't pop up very much, so I decided to use the burning tool to border them and just give them a bit of more deepness so they could pop up a little bit more when I painted the dagger. And that's it with the blade. The next step was to make the pieces of the guard. So I used some tatami for this. This material is very easy to find. I bought it at a bazaar, so you can purchase it anywhere, even in AliExpress. You can find this material. It's very cheap too. So I made a pattern with a couple of trials, and then I transferred it to the EVA foam or the tatami, and just cut it with a knife. When I got the desired shape of the guard, I just sanded down everything to smooth the edges and to have a nice and clean surface where I could stick the other part of the guard. I repeated the same steps with a thinner EVA foam, this time of 5mm, because I wanted to have the difference of measurements to match aesthetically the model I was copying. And then I glued both parts together and I just covered them with 7 layers of wood glue to achieve a smooth and shiny surface. While the guard parts were drying in the air, I started sculpting the part of the handle. For this I had to think a lot, and I came up to this idea that I haven't seen anywhere before, but maybe somebody has already invented. I just sculpted with tinfoil paper the shape I wanted around the blade. Once I sculpted the shape I wanted into the tinfoil, I modeled with some Fimo or oven clay, just thin layers, so I could wrap them around the shape I had just made on the blade. And with a couple layers, I tried to achieve the shape of the reference. And after many minutes of trying to achieve the shape of the reference, I almost got it. So even if it's not perfectly symmetrical, because I'm not very good at sculpting, I got the shape I wanted, so that would be okay for the moment. So when I had the shape I wanted, I put the piece in the oven for 15 minutes at 130 Celsius degrees. As you can see here, the piece went out okay. It got really hard, so that's good because it's a handle and it's a part of the dagger that I'm going to touch a lot, so I needed it to be resistant. And that's it. Once this was done, I was only missing one part of the handle, that was another round circle. This time I decided to do it in Metacrylathe because it was much thinner than the other two, and I just followed the same process as for the blade, that was cutting and sanding the edges. I realized that the handle piece wasn't smooth enough after baking it, so I decided to polish the surface so I could get a porcelain-like surface. So for that I first sanded down all the imperfections of the surface because some bubbles were created during the baking. And after I sanded all the surface, I used the same method as for the blade edge, and I polished all the surface. I got a thin stripe of the same oven clay and I just wrapped it around the PVC tube, and afterwards I just heat it with a heat gun because I couldn't introduce the PVC pipe in the oven. At this point I had all the pieces ready, so the next step was to stick them. At this point I had to do it while they were already mounted in the blade, because if I didn't do it this way I had the risk of not aligning them correctly, and if I didn't match the holes in the right way then I wouldn't be able to mount it, so it was important to take that into account. I drilled a couple holes in the inner part of the blade, so if I poured any kind of glue it would just go through them and create a much stronger bonding. At first my idea was to cut some hot glue pieces and melt them with the heat gun so I could pour them inside the PVC tube and join it to the part of the blade. But it didn't really go as I expected. Wow. Unexpected. Okay, I actively wanted to avoid using resin, but it's the only thing I know how to do right now. I tried the hot glue and it was such a disaster, so I'm afraid I have no other choice. So I'll be using this Resin Pro thing. I have been using it for my necklaces and my resin jewelry, so I'm just gonna mix the right proportion. It dries in 24 hours, so now that I'm sure that it's not going to pour by the edges because I use some hot glue, some accidental hot glue, but that is going to be the sealant, and this is going to be the filling. I don't care if bubbles are made here because it's going to be hidden. The only function of this is to join the tube with the inner part of the blade. And after waiting for 24 hours, I got to check if the joint was dirty enough, which turned to be right. And that's the end of part 1. Hope you liked the video, and if you want to know more about how I painted the dagger, you will be able to see it in the part 2. Thanks for watching.